My sisters turned the house I bought for our parents into a rental business behind my back. They stole my keys, rented out my vacation house, and when I caught them, my own sisters said I was the selfish one. Then they had their husbands break in. Blood might be thicker than water, but it's also more poisonous. I used to think I had it all figured out. A successful career in investment banking, financial independence by 35, and a beautiful, supportive wife who shared my vision for life. Sarah and I built our world meticulously. No children by choice, plenty of freedom, and a portfolio that would make most people envious. But have you ever felt like you could master everything, from your career to your family life? Then one day, you realize the people closest to you want to drain you dry without bothering to ask? That's where I found myself last summer. My name is David Turner, and this is the story of how my family nearly tore itself apart over a vacation house I never should have bought. My two older sisters, Lisa and Emily, live within 20 minutes of my parents' place in Connecticut. They've got the whole suburban package: husbands, kids, minivans, and perpetually tight budgets. We see each other at obligatory family gatherings, exchange pleasantries, but there's no real connection there. Never has been. David's got it so easy. I'd overhear Lisa tell Emily when they thought I couldn't hear. No kids to worry about, fancy vacations whenever they want, must be nice. What they didn't understand was that Sarah and I worked 60-hour weeks to build what we had. Our easy life was the result of deliberate choices and sacrifices they couldn't comprehend. 3 years ago, I bought a vacation house in the Berkshires as a gift for my parents, a place where they could escape and relax in their retirement. I kept my name on the deed, but told them to consider it their own. One crucial detail: I never mentioned my ownership to my sisters. I knew them too well. Give them an inch, they'd take the whole damn property. The trouble started on a Tuesday. My phone lit up with Lisa's name. "Davy," she said, using that childhood nickname I've always hated. "Emily and I were talking. That vacation house sits empty most of the year, right? We could list it on Airbnb, split the profits, help with our kids' college funds. It's perfect." Not a question, a statement, as if the house belonged to all of us equally. "That's not going to work," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Mom and Dad need their space. They use it, what, twice a month? Don't be selfish. Some of us have actual families to support." That's when everything started going sideways. The weekly family BBQ at my parents' place was coming up that Sunday. Sarah suggested we skip it, sensing the brewing storm, but my mother called, practically begging us to come. "Your father misses you," she said, though I knew the real reason. She couldn't handle Lisa and Emily's chaos alone. My wife and I, childless yet perpetually dragged into these family disasters. Why subject ourselves to this if it only brought stress? "We'll make an appearance," I finally told Sarah, who nodded reluctantly. We arrived an hour late, finding exactly what we expected. Lisa and Emily's husbands, Tom and Eric, 3 beers deep by the pool, 5 children running wild through the yard. My parents looking overwhelmed but determined to maintain the illusion of a perfect family gathering. This was merely the calm before the storm. Lisa spotted us the moment we entered the backyard. Her face, flushed from too many drinks, contorted into a scowl. "Well, look who finally showed up," she announced loudly, "and not even dressed for swimming. Too good for family fun, David?" Emily snickered beside her, both clutching wine glasses they'd refilled several times. Their husbands barely acknowledged us, absorbed in some argument about football. "We're just here to say hello," I said, guiding Sarah toward my parents at the grill. "Of course," Emily slurred. "Always on your own schedule, never fitting in with the rest of us." When had I last been the right kind of family member to them? Probably before I chose a career that took me beyond our hometown's borders. Mom hugged us both, whispering, "Thank you for coming," while Dad nodded, flipping burgers. Their normal greeting felt like the calm center of a storm. The kids were everywhere, Lisa's 2 and Emily's 3, running wild. Jacob sprayed everyone with a garden hose while Megan climbed furniture despite Mom's warnings. "Kids, settle down," Lisa called without conviction. "Let them play," Emily countered. "That's what family gatherings are for." Sarah and I exchanged knowing glances. This chaos was precisely why we avoided these functions. 20 minutes later, disaster struck. One of Emily's twins, I can never tell them apart, shoved our neighbor Mrs. Wilson. She stumbled into a chair, getting soaked by Jacob's hose in the process. "Oh my," Ms. Wilson gasped, forcing a smile. "Boys will be boys, I suppose." If only we knew this was just the beginning of our family meltdown. While talking with Dad, I heard a splash followed by screaming. 3 kids had jumped into the deep end simultaneously. The older ones surfaced immediately, but 5-year-old Megan flailed in panic. Before I could move, Tom dove in fully clothed and pulled her out. She was crying, but unhurt, just frightened. The party descended into chaos. "What the hell, David?" Lisa screamed, rushing to her daughter. "You were right there. Why didn't you do something?" I was stunned silent. "It happened in seconds. You could have let my daughter drown," she shrieked. Emily jumped in. "This is what happens when people without kids don't understand responsibility." The accusation left me speechless. They'd been drinking for hours, neglecting their children, and somehow this was my fault? Sarah stepped forward. "That's completely unfair. We were across the yard." "Stay out of this," Emily snapped. "This is family business." "She is family," I growled, feeling my control slipping. "Is she?" Lisa retorted. "Real family helps each other out. Real family shares what they have." There it was. The true issue exposed by fear and alcohol. This wasn't about Megan at all. This was about the vacation house. "One more word," I warned quietly, "and we're leaving." "Go ahead," Lisa taunted. "Run away like always, but don't think this conversation is over." I looked to my parents for support, but they remained frozen, unwilling to take sides. In that moment, I realized they never would. "We're done here," I told Sarah, who nodded grimly. Walking to our car through the continued shouting, Sarah squeezed my hand. "This isn't over, is it?" "No," I replied, starting the engine. "I think it's just beginning." I had no idea how right I was or how quickly things would escalate beyond imagination. The morning after the BBQ disaster, my phone lit up with notifications. 6 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Lisa, and a string of text messages that grew increasingly hostile as they progressed. "You need to apologize," read Lisa's first message. "Answer your damn phone," came 3 hours later. "Your behavior yesterday was inexcusable," was the most recent. I showed Sarah, who had just handed me a cup of coffee. She sighed, sitting down beside me on our kitchen island. "They're rewriting history," she said, "making you the villain." "They're good at that." I put my phone face down. "I'm not calling them back." "They'll just keep calling." She was right. By noon, my phone rang again, this time Tom, Lisa's husband. Against my better judgment, I answered. "What do you want, Tom?" "Listen here, you entitled prick," he slurred, clearly still drinking from yesterday. "You think you're better than the rest of us because you've got money? Because you chose not to have kids? Some of us are raising the next generation while you and Sarah just live your selfish little lives." I felt something snap inside me. "Is that why you called? To insult me for choices that have nothing to do with you? You let Megan struggle in that pool. You just stood there." "I was 30 feet away when it happened," I said through gritted teeth. "And where were you, Tom?" "Oh, right, getting drunk while your kid played near water she can't swim in." "Fuck you, David. You've always thought you were too good for this family." "No, Tom. This family has always thought they were entitled to whatever I have. My time, my money, my property." The line went quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a nasty sound. "Property? Like that vacation house you're so precious about? The one you won't share?" "Eric and I were talking. It's not even in your name, is it? It's in your parents'. Which means when they're gone, it belongs to all of us." My blood ran cold. I'd never told anyone the house was in my name. My parents must have mentioned it. "You've been discussing my parents' death and dividing their assets?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Don't act so shocked. We all know you've got them wrapped around your finger." "But blood is blood, David. An equal 3-way split is coming whether you like it or not." I ended the call without another word. Sarah was watching me, concern etched across her face. "How bad?" "Worse than I thought." I explained Tom's inheritance theory. "What are you going to do?" she asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What was I prepared to do? I'd spent my entire adult life trying to maintain some semblance of family connection while keeping healthy boundaries. But those boundaries had been trampled repeatedly. and now they were eyeing the one thing I'd tried to do purely out of love for my parents. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I know I'm done being their punching bag. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. My phone continued to buzz. Mom again, then Dad, then Emily. I ignored them all. By evening, I'd made my decision. I need to protect what's mine, I told Sarah over dinner. Not just the house, but our peace. She nodded. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. That night, I drafted 3 emails. The first was to my lawyer, asking him to review the deed to the vacation property and ensure it was ironclad. The second was to a security company requesting quotes for a comprehensive system at the house. The third was to my family. Recent events have made it clear that we need space from each other, I wrote. I'll be taking some time away from family gatherings to reevaluate our relationship. The vacation home is not and will not be available for use by anyone except Mom and Dad, as was always intended. This is non-negotiable. I hesitated before pressing send, wondering if this would burn bridges permanently. Then I remembered Tom's words about waiting for my parents to die so they could claim what was mine, and hit send without further hesitation. The response was nuclear. My phone exploded with calls I didn't answer. Then came the texts. "How dare you?" from Lisa. "You're tearing this family apart," from Emily. "Please reconsider," from Mom. Dad, notably, sent nothing. I turned my phone off completely and sat in my home office, staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline. I'd spent years building walls between myself and the chaos of my family, creating a life of order and purpose with Sarah. Now, those walls were crumbling and I needed to decide. Rebuild stronger than before or let it all fall. The choice ultimately was clear. I would protect what mattered: my marriage, my peace of mind, and yes, the house I'd bought out of love, but was now becoming a symbol of everything wrong with my family dynamics. I feel like I'm being torn apart within my own family, I told Sarah that night as we lay in bed. But they've pushed me too far this time. She squeezed my hand in the darkness. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people who should respect them most. The next morning, I called my lawyer and started the process of formally documenting that the vacation house would remain solely in my possession, with clear usage rights for my parents but no inheritance claims for my sisters. It was a drastic step, but after years of being manipulated and now actively targeted, I'd reached my limit. They'd tried to take advantage of me once too often. Now I would protect what was mine. 3 days after my legal maneuvers began, my father called. Unlike the barrage of angry messages from my sisters, his voice was measured, concerned. "David, things are getting out of hand," he said. "Your mother's upset. Everyone's upset." "I'm upset too, Dad. Did you know Tom and Eric have been discussing how they'll divide up the vacation house when you and Mom are gone?" A heavy silence. "They wouldn't. They would and they did. But that's not even the worst part." I opened my laptop and navigated to the rental listing I discovered that morning, a listing that had made my blood boil. There on Airbnb was my vacation property, advertised as luxury Berkshire getaway for $450 per night. The photos showed my furnishings, my mother's garden, the kitchen I'd renovated last spring. "Dad, they're renting out the house. Without permission, they've somehow gotten access." That's impossible," he stammered. "We're the only ones with keys." "Check your key ring," I said flatly. "I'll bet your set is missing." Another silence, then I heard him rummaging through a drawer. His voice, when it returned, was smaller. "They're not here, but we never... Someone gave them access, and now they're profiting from my property. I'll talk to them," Dad promised. "We'll sort this out." But it was too late for talking. I'd already contacted Airbnb to have the listing removed for fraud, and I'd already scheduled a locksmith and security installation for the following day. "I'm handling it," I told him, "but you need to know that this stops now." Sarah drove with me to the Berkshires the next morning. The house looked peaceful as we pulled up, no sign of the betrayal that had occurred within its walls. The locksmith had just finished when my phone rang. "Lisa." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Our booking just got canceled and the guests want their deposit back." "Your booking?" I laughed incredulously. "You mean the illegal rental of property you don't own? Mom and Dad said we could use it. You're just being selfish as usual. Did they say you could rent it out commercially? Did they give you permission to steal their keys and list my property online?" Your property? It's a family house. No, Lisa. It's my house that I graciously allow our parents to use. Not you, not Emily, and certainly not paying strangers you're collecting money from. She was silent for a moment. You've always been like this, controlling, superior. You think because you have money you can buy family loyalty. I'm hanging up now, I said, and if I see one more listing for this house, I'm involving lawyers. We spent the day securing the house. New locks, security cameras, motion sensors, the works. I gave the only spare set of keys to the property management company I'd hired. By evening, I felt some measure of control returning, though the bitter taste of betrayal lingered. As we were preparing to leave, a truck roared into the driveway. Tom and Eric jumped out, clearly intoxicated, with Lisa and Emily close behind in a second car. "So this is how it's going to be?" Tom shouted, staggering toward me. "You're locking your own family out?" "You need to leave," I said, positioning myself between them and Sarah. "Or what?" Eric sneered. "You'll call Daddy's lawyers?" "No," I replied calmly, holding up my phone. "I'll call the police. You're trespassing." "It's not trespassing," Lisa yelled. "This is our family home." "Show me your name on the deed," I challenged. Emily stepped forward, trembling with rage. "You self-righteous bastard! You're willing to destroy this family over a house?" "I didn't destroy anything," I countered. "You did that when you stole keys and tried to profit from something that doesn't belong to you." Tom lurched forward suddenly, grabbing the security sign the technician had placed near the door. With a roar, he ripped it from the ground and hurled it at the porch, shattering one of the decorative lanterns. "That's property damage," I said, already dialing 911. "And assault, if you come any closer." "You're calling the cops on family?" Lisa shrieked. "What is wrong with you?" Everything happened quickly after that. Tom tried to force his way past me to the door. I blocked him, and he shoved me hard. The police arrived within minutes, finding Tom and Eric still belligerent, now trying to break a window to gain entry. I pressed charges. All of them: trespassing, property damage, assault. The officers took statements, photographed the damage, and led Tom and Eric away in handcuffs while my sisters screamed obscenities at me from the driveway. As we drove home that night, I felt hollow rather than victorious. "They'll hate me forever for this," I told Sarah. "Maybe," she agreed. "But would you rather let them steamroll you forever? This was never about the house, David. It's about respect." My phone lit up with calls from my parents, which I ignored. Then a text from my mother. "How could you do this to your sisters, to your family?" I turned the phone off completely. This wasn't the end. As we drove back to our Manhattan apartment, I realized this was only the beginning of a different kind of battle, one that would play out in police stations and possibly courtrooms. I had drawn my line in the sand. I would no longer be the one hurt in this story. If I had to fight to protect what was mine, my property, my boundaries, my peace, then that's exactly what I would do. The fallout from the arrests was immediate and severe. My phone was flooded with voicemails from family members I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly experts on my cruel and heartless behavior. My parents stopped calling altogether, a silence that hurt more than the barrage of accusations. 2 weeks after the incident, I received an email from the property management company I'd hired to oversee the vacation house. They'd discovered something concerning during their initial assessment: evidence of extensive rental activity spanning the past 8 months. "Mr. Turner, we've found numerous guest books, cleaning schedules, and even a hidden lockbox with instructions for renters," the manager wrote. "Based on our review, the property has been rented at least 47 nights since January." I forwarded the email to my lawyer, then opened my laptop and began digging. What I found made my stomach churn. Lisa and Emily had created a business entity, Berkshire Family Retreats LLC, and had been systematically renting out my property through multiple vacation rental sites. Based on their advertised rates and booking calendar, they'd collected over $30,000 in rental fees, money that belonged to me, from a property I paid for, maintained, and insured. They thought I was stupid, I told Sarah, showing her the documentation I'd compiled. "They've been doing this for months, maybe longer. What are you going to do?" she asked, her face pale. It was the question that had been haunting me for days. How far was I willing to go? What was the price of freedom from this toxic family dynamic? "I'm cutting all ties," I said finally. "Legally, financially, emotionally." The next morning, I called a locksmith to replace every lock again, plus add deadbolts and a security gate. I contacted a surveillance company to install cameras covering every approach to the property. I changed the utility accounts to require two-factor authentication. I was turning the vacation house into a fortress. Then I called my parents. "This has to stop," I told my father without preamble. "I've discovered Lisa and Emily have been renting out the house for months. They've made a business of it." His silence told me everything I needed to know. "You knew," I said flatly. "They needed the money, David," he finally replied. "For the kids' college funds. You and Sarah don't have those expenses." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. "That wasn't your decision to make. It's my property. It's a family house. No, Dad, it's my house that I let you use out of love. A gesture you've all twisted and exploited." "Don't be so dramatic. I'm done," I interrupted. "The locks have been changed again. The security code is different. If you and Mom want to use the house, you'll need to coordinate with me directly. No one else gets access. Period." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. That evening, Emily's husband Eric called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was slurred, menacing. "Think again, little brother. You can't keep us out forever." "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "And if you attempt to enter the property again, I'll have you arrested. Again." "This isn't over," he shouted. "You can't just cut off your family." "Watch me," I said, and ended the call. That night, as Sarah and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she took my hand. "Are you sure about this? All of it?" "I've never been more certain," I replied. "They pushed me too far this time." "They might never forgive you." "I might never forgive them," I countered. "Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed." The security company called the next morning. Someone had attempted to break into the vacation house overnight. The cameras had captured clear images of Tom and Eric, bolt cutters in hand, trying to cut through the new gate lock. "Do you want us to call the police?" the security operator asked. I thought about my sisters, my parents, the years of manipulation and betrayal. "Yes," I said firmly. "And send me the footage. I'm pressing charges." There would be only one winner in this war, and it would be me. The security footage left nothing to the imagination. Tom and Eric, clearly intoxicated, attempting to breach the gate with bolt cutters. When that failed, they smashed several windows and kicked in a side door. The police arrived within minutes of the alarm triggering, catching them red-handed as they ransacked the living room. This time, the charges were more serious. Breaking and entering, vandalism, criminal trespassing, property damage exceeding $5,000, the district attorney was pushing for jail time given their previous arrest just weeks earlier. "We need to talk," Sarah said the morning after they were booked. "Are you sure you want to take this all the way? They broke into my house. Again, after being arrested once already, what am I supposed to do?" "I'm just asking if this is the endgame you want. Once this goes through the courts, there's no coming back for your family." I knew she was right. The nuclear option meant total destruction, not just victory. 3 days later, I received a letter from Tom's attorney. Inside was a personal note from Tom, handwritten on lined paper. "David, I've hit rock bottom. I'm facing jail time, Emily's threatening divorce, and I could lose my job. I know I've been terrible to you. The drinking, the entitlement, the damage I've caused, there's no excuse. We went too far. Way too far. I'll pay for all damages and stay away from you and the property forever if you'll consider reducing the charges. I'm begging you. Not for me, but for my kids." Included was a cashier's check for $25,000. Eric sent a similar letter the next day with another $25,000 check. "They're desperate," my lawyer explained. "The DA has a solid case for felony charges. With prior arrests, they're looking at potential incarceration." "What are my options?" I asked. "You could push for maximum penalties, or we could negotiate a settlement. Restraining orders, financial compensation, and misdemeanor charges that wouldn't result in jail time." I thought about my nieces and nephews, about Sarah's question regarding the endgame I wanted. "Draft the settlement," I decided, "but make it ironclad. If they ever come near the property again, all original charges return." The agreement was comprehensive. Tom and Eric would plead guilty to reduced charges with suspended sentences. They would pay restitution for all damages. Most importantly, they agreed to legally binding no-contact orders, not just for the property, but for Sarah and me personally. My sisters were furious but powerless. Their husbands had made their choices, and now all of them would live with the consequences. As I signed the final paperwork in my lawyer's office, I felt no triumph, just exhaustion. Was it worth it? Sarah asked on the drive home. I don't know, I admitted. I won, but at what cost? Sometimes the price of freedom is higher than we expect. We drove in silence for a while before I spoke again. I don't regret standing my ground, but I do regret that it came to this. 6 months later, my mother called for the first time since everything happened. Her voice was tentative, uncertain. The leaves are changing at the house, she said. Your father and I were wondering if we could use it this weekend. Of course, I replied. That's what it's there for, just you two. Just us, she confirmed. Thank you, David. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something, a small step toward a new kind of normal. Sometimes justice isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about establishing boundaries that even the most determined can't cross. I had done that, and despite the cost, I could finally sleep at night knowing what was mine would stay mine. In the end, that hard-won peace was victory enough, and